Good, good evening, Rotarians and all colleagues in peace. I'm Jim Halderman, the chair of District 5450 Peace Committee, who is the sponsor of the Forum for Discussion. I'll assume you all have read Emile's amazing bio talking of life as a moral philosopher, intellectual historian, and journalist. But Emile's published work is extensive in many authored books, published articles, and podcasts. Emile has appeared on Al Jazeera English, Al Jazeera Arabic, BBC Radio, Australian Broadcasting Corporation, and much more, certainly around the world. Also, what is not in Emile's bio is a life as a musician, releasing many albums and sold a batch of songs to MTV. We are so fortunate to have someone with such an extensive and credited background. Emile, the screen is yours.
Thanks so much for that. It's really wonderful to be here. Nice to meet everyone who's attending. I'm going to share my screen. I do not have a lengthy PowerPoint presentation, but I do have some slides that I'd like to share. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, you can see that?
Yes.
Great. Let me ask one last question. When I maximize this, can you see me flipping from one slide to the other?
Yes.
You can. Okay, great. Usually that doesn't work. Um, Excellent. Okay, so the title is Prospects for Peace in the AI arms race between China and the US, but I'll be discussing a number of, I will be um, pursuing a few tangents here and there. Hopefully, these tangents will be sufficiently interesting. And also, if people have questions at any point, feel free to raise your hand. Let me know in the chat. If there's a term, for example, that I don't explain well enough, let me know. Okay, so here's the agenda. Four main points to make. One concerns the question of what are the test rule ideologies? I'll explain that term in a second. And why do they matter? Second, what is the connection between the test rule ideologies and AGI, or artificial general intelligence? Uh, and then I'll explore two potential threats to peace. One is an impending arms race with China, and the second one is it concerns an implication of the test rule worldview, which I call pro-extinctionism. It sounds as ominous as it really is. um, okay, so task realism, this is a term that I suggested during a collaboration with the computer scientist Timnit Gebru. Timnit Gebru, unlike me, has a huge public status as a public figure. So she's been on Time Magazine's 100 Most Influential People at least once, et cetera, et cetera. So she has a long list of accolades. It was really cool to get to collaborate with her. And the goal of our project was to examine the ideological roots of the current race to build AGI, again, artificial general intelligence. Um, One way to think about AGI is like this. AI is a very large uh, domain that would include any uh, depending on the definition, could include any computational device. Like you could even consider a calculator to have a version of AI. In fact, in a very narrow sense, calculator is super intelligent, right? Because it can solve math problems much quicker than any human. So within the broader field of AI, there's AGI. And so this is typically defined as an AI system that performs at least as well as humans in every cognitive domain of interest. So this would be like scientific discovery, technological innovation, social interaction and manipulation, and so on. So all of those cognitive domains that are important to us, AGI does at least as well as humans. And then if you zoom in, so you've got AI and then AGI. If you zoom into AGI, there's an even smaller uh, um, uh, territory within it that refers to superintelligence, or ASI, artificial superintelligence. And so this is typically defined as a system that doesn't just perform as well as any human, but far exceeds the capabilities of humans in every cognitive domain of interest. And so I'll discuss more about this in a bit, but the idea is that once we get AGI, we very soon after that get ASI. Right. So the idea is that, okay, once you have a system that performs at least as well as humans, then you can offload the task of designing the next generation of AI systems to the AGI. Right. So you get this positive feedback loop where the more capable the system becomes, the better positioned it is to design even more capable systems. So positive feedback loop, it's called recursive self-improvement. Um, okay, so Gabru and I were trying to figure out like how did the race to build AGI start? Where did it come from? Because back in the 90s, really even in the early 2000s, nobody was talking about AGI. Computer scientists were focused on systems that can perform narrow tasks like understanding language, like recognizing images and so on. Not the goal wasn't to devise a single algorithm that can do everything, right? That can rival the human brain in its repertoire of capabilities. So where did this come from? And we we concluded that you cannot tell an origin story about the race to build AGI without reference to these seven ideologies. So there are a lot of big like polysyllabic terms here. I'll go through them and I'll explain each briefly. Transhumanism, extropianism, singularitarianism, cosmism, rationalism, effective altruism, and long-termism. Um, so transhumanism is the idea that we ought to develop advanced technologies to radically re-engineer the human organism. And the ultimate goal then would be to create or become a new post-human species. The roots of transhumanism go back to the eugenics movement of the 20th century, right? So the individuals who first developed the idea of transhumanism were leading eugenicists, right? So like Julian Huxley would be an example. He was the president of the British Eugenics Society from 1959 to 1962. And the difference between transhumanism and eugenics is that transhumanism is kind of eugenics on steroids. So what the eugenicists wanted was to prevent the human species from degenerating and also to perfect the human species, to create the best version of our species possible. Transhumanists, so these early uh, eugenicists who developed the idea of transhumanism said, why stop at perfecting our species? Why not just create an entirely new species that is superior to us in certain ways, cognitively, physically, emotionally, beings that have much longer lifespan, maybe that can live for thousands or millions of years. So that is, it's in that sense that transhumanism is eugenics on steroids, right? Um, and and transhumanism has a couple of different stages of its development. There's early transhumanism that goes back to the 20th century. The first book that developed the idea of transhumanism was published by Julian Huxley in 1927, called Religion Without Revelation. Kind of an interesting title, um, which I think gestures at the fact that transhumanism is very similar to traditional religion, like Christianity. Checks a lot of the same boxes: immortality, utopia, etc. Um, Modern transhumanism, in contrast, arose when people started to realize that we may be able to develop advanced technologies that enable us to intervene upon the human species in very short periods of time. So rather than the old methods of eugenics, which take a long time to work, if they work at all, which they don't really, but if they were to work, they would take a long time because each generation needs to produce children with desirable traits for the human species to be perfected over time. So it's a transgenerational process, takes a long time. In contrast, what if we develop like genetic engineering or nanotechnology or maybe some AI system that we could fuse with the human to create a post-human species in one's lifetime or over a single generation, right? If parents had the ability to design their babies, right? So I want my child to have these particular attributes. They're going to be tall, super strong. We're going to try to select the genes for intelligence so that my kid is a genius and so on. So these are the ideas that led to modern transhumanism. And it got a lot of people excited. Maybe post-humanity is right around the corner. Maybe you and I can become post-human. Maybe we can live forever. And so extropianism was the very first instance of modern transhumanism. So the founder of extropianism is a guy named Max Moore, and he claims to also be the founder of modern transhumanism. Um, so extropianism is really notable because a lot of the other ideologies inherited a lot from the extropian worldview. It, extropians tend to be very libertarian, so they think that the best way to address whatever risks there are associated with advanced technologies, the best way to address those is the free market, right? So it's not top-down government regulation. No, everything's better if the government just gets the hell out of the way, and um, and the free market can determine the right course to take. Um, so yeah, so extropianism, there was huge intellectual inheritance passed down from extropianism. That's why Gabru and I include it in the acronym, even though there aren't that many people today who would say, I'm an extropian. Um, Singularitarianism is like extropianism, it's a version of modern transhumanism. So singularitarians believe that the key to becoming post-human is the technological singularity. This is a term that you hear discussed pretty frequently among Silicon Valley types when they're talking about AI. In fact, I had mentioned before the positive feedback loop. Once we cross this threshold of AGI, maybe it's just a very short period of time after, at which point we get ASI or artificial superintelligence, right? Because of recursive self-improvement, because the AI is going to take over the whole task of designing even more powerful systems. That's the singularity. I mean, there are some different definitions, but that's the most influential conception of what the singularity is. So the singularitarian transhumanists, they're the ones who said, yeah, post-humanity is the ultimate goal, but really the key is to develop advanced AI so that it produces this intelligence explosion. And then once we have superintelligence, we can just delegate it the task of designing advanced technologies to make us post-human. We can just say like, oh, you're super intelligent. You're a godlike AI, is the term some of them use. Could you solve the problem of aging? And so maybe the superintelligence takes like 3 or 4 seconds to think, and it goes, okay, I have a solution. Just inject this solution into your bloodstream, and you'll live forever, or whatever. Um, so that's singularitarianism. Cosmism, this was founded by an individual who popularized the term AGI. So the whole reason that we talk about artificial general intelligence these days is because of this guy named Ben Goertzel. And his notion of cosmism was the following. Why stop at re-engineering humanity? Let's go out and re-engineer the entire universe, right? So he literally talks about future scientific magic that will enable us to intervene upon the fundamental fabric of space and time, to manipulate the universe in ways we can't even comprehend right now or anticipate right now, to manipulate the universe, to make it, to bend it to our will and our liking. So that's cosmism. It's this even more expansive notion of transhumanism that is really cosmic in scale. And in a moment, I will get to why we're talking about because a lot of people who first encounter these ideologies are just like, why is this worth thinking about? The reason is because these ideologies are massively influential in Silicon Valley. I'll provide some really startling examples later on, but like pretty much everybody in Silicon Valley, from Peter Thiel to Elon Musk to Sam Altman to, I mean, the list goes on and on. All of these individuals have been massively influenced. by the TESCREAL bundle of ideologies and their worldviews about according to which we ought to become post-human, go out, colonize space, literally build. This is something they actually talk about, build planet-sized computers to run virtual reality worlds in which there are trillions and trillions of digital people, right? So these ideas are taken seriously. Elon Musk, in fact, retweeted a link to the paper that first described what I just mentioned. And in that tweet that Elon Musk retweeted said, likely the most important paper ever written, right? So that's that. You know, as I like to say, the world is overflowing with bizarre, potentially dangerous ideologies. Most of them are not worth are are not worth the time it takes to think and critique them because they're just not influential. They don't have much power. That's not the case with these ideologies. Okay, so moving along, rationalism is a rationalism grew out of the transhumanist extropian movement. The founder is a guy named Eliezer Yudkowsky, and he is a transhumanist who participated in the extropian movement in the 1990s. He's a singularitarian, and he hired Ben Goertzel, the cosmist, to work for his institute focused on AI. He's also deeply influential within the effective altruist and long-termist community. So here's a guy, there are many examples of this as well. Here's a guy who has a direct connection to every single one of the TESCREAL letters. So he basically said, okay, look, if we're going to create this cosmic utopia through advanced technology, we're going to need a lot of like really smart people doing really smart things, quote unquote. Maybe it's worth taking a step back, trying to figure out how to optimize our smartness. That's the whole point of rationality. What are the different cognitive biases that can distort our thinking, that can prevent us from thinking clearly about problems? Um, and what does it mean to be rational? How do we optimize our rationality? All of this sounds good from a distance until you look at the details. So, for example, Yudkowsky argued uh, that if he, so he said, imagine there's a situation in which a forced choice situation in which someone says you have to choose between one of these two scenarios. Um, there's no way out of this. On the one hand, there's an individual who is mercilessly and relentlessly tortured for 50 years straight. On the other hand, there is an enormous number of people who suffer the almost imperceptible discomfort of having a speck of dust in their eye. Which of those do you choose? In other words, which one is less bad? And he says, well, look, if you are truly rational, you're going to do the math and you're going to add up all of the suffering, the slight discomfort caused by the dust speck in someone's eye. If you add that up, you get a greater total amount of suffering than somebody being tortured for 50 years, right? So you should choose the torture scenario because that is less bad than all of these people just going like this, at one point. If that number is big enough, then it outweighs the torture of a single individual for 50 years. And so I think most philosophers, most moral philosophers would say that this is deeply misguided. but this, rationalists have a very particular notion of what constitutes rational thought. And the thought experiment that Yudkowsky put forward, I think, exemplifies that, right? So that's rationalism. We need to optimize our rationality. Effective altruism is similar, except the focus is not optimizing our rationality, but optimizing our morality. And so again, this kind of sounds good from a distance until you look at the details. So the whole point of effective altruism is to find the best ways to do the most good in the world. Um, I'll give you an example of how this very quickly goes wrong. Effective altruists introduced this idea called earning to give. And they said, look, imagine you could go work for like a climate nonprofit. Um, and throughout your career, you're going to do a certain amount of good in the world. But now imagine you go and work for what the leading effective altruist himself refers to as an immoral organization, a petrochemical company, a company on Wall Street, etc. And you consequently make a ton of money. If you make millions of dollars and then you donate that money to the climate nonprofit, they can hire not one person, but like 20 people, maybe 50 people. And so overall, then, the total amount of good you can do by going and working on Wall Street or for a petrochemical company, et cetera, is much greater than if you dedicated your life uh, to working for that directly for that climate nonprofit, right? So this is earning to give, and it is exactly this idea that inspired someone named Sam Bankman-Fried, who I suspect some of you have heard of. um, so he met the founder of effective altruism back in, I think it was 2012 or 2013, um, and the founder named Will McCaskill. McCaskill said, "There's this idea, earn to give. If you want to do the most good you could possibly do in the world, go work on Wall Street." So Sam Bankman-Fried did that. He worked at Jane Street Capital, and after that, he decided to get into crypto. Because as one journalist put it, his goal was to, quote, get filthy rich for charity's sake, right? So his goal was to make billions and billions of dollars off of crypto. And for a while that was working. But then it turns out that in his effort to do the most good possible, he cut some corners and committed massive amounts of fraud. And so now he's in federal prison, I think for 30 years or something. So I could see some people chuckling. Yeah. So, um, again, like effective altruism, like rationalism, I think from a distance it looks great. Like the very general description of these ideologies, I would agree with. I want to be, the best altruist I can be in the world. I want to be rational and so on. But it's really like their particular take on what it means to be effectively altruistic or rational that is, in my view at least, deeply problematic. Long-termism. Finally, we've gotten to the last ideology here. This is what happens when effective altruism collides with insights from modern cosmology. I'll explain. So, modern cosmology tells us that the universe is huge, right? There's somewhere between like 200 and 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. There are between, I think it's um, 200 billion and 2 trillion. So really wide, range of estimates here. 2 trillion galaxies in the observable universe as a whole. So there's enormous amounts of resources, as far as we could tell, untapped resources out there in the universe. Furthermore, the universe is going to be habitable for a really long period of time, right? Universe is 13.8 billion years old. Universe will be around and be livable for something like 10 to the 100 years, right? So one followed by 100 zeros. So way longer period than the universe has existed so far. So if you put those two things together, you realize like, oh, well, if we survive on Earth and then eventually spread into space and start to colonize the universe, the future population could be huge. It could be utterly vast. One person in the community estimates that there could be at least 10 to the 58 people in the future. So again, one followed by 58 zeros, which is way, way, way larger than the total human population so far, which is about 117 billion. 8 billion of us are living right now, 117 billion in total. So the future human population is way, way bigger than the current population. What does that mean? Well, if your goal is to positively influence the greatest number of people, and if most people who could exist will exist in the far future, then the most rational thing to do as an altruist is to focus on the very far future. So how do my actions today influence people literally millions, billions, and trillions of years from now, right? Because there might be little ripple effects that get amplified over time. So there are decisions I could make today that might potentially have a huge impact on those future people. So my very cheeky, irreverent um, way of criticizing this is that long-termism could be sloganized as "won't someone think of all the digital unborn?" So there are all these digital humans who could exist in the far future, but they're not born yet, but they should be born. So let's do everything we can to preserve civilization and then go out and colonize the universe. And the whole reason that future people should be digital is twofold. On the one hand, we probably can't colonize space if we're just biological beings. We'll almost certainly need to be digital because space is just really, really hostile to biological critters like us, right? There's a lot of radiation, space radiation. Microgravity is not good for muscle mass, for the brain even. Um, so we're going to need to be digital beings in some way if we're going to spread beyond our solar system, maybe even get to Mars. And the second is that since long-termists believe that the future human population should be as big as possible, bigger the better, right? Because the more people you have in the future, the more total value could exist in the universe. And the more total value that exists in the universe, the better the universe is, right? If you have two universes to select from and one has like this much value, and the other has this much value, well, then you should pick this one. That's what they would say. Um, and so this is why you want the largest population possible. The thing is that if you remain biological, you're not going to be able to maximize the future population. You can fit more digital beings per unit of space or space-time than you can biological beings. So that's why the goal is to go out, spread to the stars, build planet-sized computers to run virtual reality worlds so that you can have trillions and trillions, 10 to the 58 digital people in the future. Okay, so I don't know how these ideologies come across to people. Most individuals I speak with who are just coming across them, as I alluded to before, are like, this is so nutty. This is so weird. But these ideas are very much taken seriously by people. In fact, I myself, for 10 years, I was in this community. Um, I'm listed as the sixth most prolific contributor to some of the literature here. So I was a true believer. I hung out with these people all the time. So I can attest from personal experience that there are people who really believe that this vision of the future is super important. Okay. Um, yeah, so here is, let me take a sip real fast, sorry. Here's an image from Our World in Data, which is very much aligned with the TESCREAL movement, showing how many future people there could be. So humanity's past, you could see up at the top here, my cursor's not showing up, but you can see up at the top there's a certain uh, there's a certain number of, like I said before, 117 billion humans in total. That's one estimate at least. 8 billion are alive today, but the future, it could be, you know, uh, Carl Sagan was the first person, so far as I know, having looked into the history of these ideas, I believe he was the first person ever to calculate how many future people there could be. And he said, if we survive on Earth for the average lifetime of a mammalian species, which he thought was 10 million years, and if the human population remains fixed and people live on average for 100 years, then in the next 10 million years, there could be 500 trillion people, right? And then long-termists came along and said, they expanded these estimates and said, why stay on Earth? Let's colonize the universe. Once we do that, we have a much greater number of future people. And that is precisely why focusing on the very far future matters so much more than focusing on the present, right? In the grand scheme of things, even the worst um, disasters, atrocities, etc., that are happening right now are nothing. They're not even visible. The way I put it before is they're just a molecule in a drop in the ocean, right? In the grand scheme of things, because they're all, the future's this big, the present is this big. Okay, so I don't know why there's a yellow line at the top of my screen. Okay, at the heart of these ideologies is, so really the key idea to know about these ideologies is that at their heart is this techno-utopian vision of the future in which we become post-human beings or create a new post-human species, spread beyond Earth, conquer the universe, subjugate all natural processes, exploit all of the resources that are out there in the cosmos, which they themselves call our cosmic endowment of negentropy or negative entropy, which basically just means usable energy. So it's our cosmic endowment of usable energy. Ascend the Kardashev scale and create huge virtual reality worlds in which trillions and trillions of people live. The Kardashev scale is really interesting It's basically a measure of the energy consumption of a civilization, right? So a type 1 civilization could control and could control all processes and harness all the energy on its planet. Type 2 can control all the processes in its solar system. Type 3 is the entire galaxy, right? Type 3 Kardashev civilization. Type 4 would be the ability to control all processes in the entire universe, right? So Kardashev 4, that is the ultimate goal here. Elon Musk has occasionally referred to this. His goal in colonizing Mars is to get us beyond the solar system, right? Mars is a stepping stone to the rest of the solar system. Rest of the solar system is a stepping stone to the galaxy, to the universe as a whole. Um, and yes, like I was saying before, that there are uh, roots. The entire TESCRO bundle has deep roots within the eugenics movement of the 20th century. And there are two French scholars whose names I'm not remembering off the top of my head, but they have this lovely turn of phrase, which is the eternal return of eugenics. And the claim that Timnit Gebru and I, my collaborator, the claim that we make in a paper that we published last year on the TESCRO bundle um, is that these TESCRO ideologies are just the most recent iteration of the eternal return. Because again, like transhumanism, which is the backbone of the whole bundle, that is a form of eugenics, right? Sort of uncontroversially. And it's in with respect to its goal, it is eugenics on steroids. Again, it's not about like one group of people, like white people or Aryans, becoming dominant within the human population. No, it's about creating a whole new population of post-humans to become dominant in the world, to run and rule the world. And okay, so this is the overview of test realism. Now we get to AGI. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time here. AGI, once again, artificial general intelligence. So why did the AGI race emerge out of these out of the test movement? Because for reasons that I alluded to earlier, once we have AGI, we probably have superintelligence. And if we have superintelligence, then we basically have a god, right? We could delegate it any task. Cure aging, like I said before, figure out how to colonize space. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, one of the leading AGI companies out there, has literally said on social media that he doesn't think we can colonize space without AGI. So AGI is, maybe there are other ways to get to techno-utopia that don't involve advanced AI. Maybe there's like nanotechnology or some form of genetic engineering, synthetic biology, something like that. Maybe those are ways that we could reach the end of post-humanity and create a kind of utopian world. The thing is that AGI is different than all of these other technologies because AGI is an agent in itself. It's not like a tool that we would use. It's a thing that controls tools, just like we control tools. So once we have AGI, we have superintelligence, and um, people in the test world community tend to have this kind of engineering mindset, according to which everything, all problems we're facing, are engineering problems fundamentally. Um, Literally, they refer to the task of creating utopia as, quote, paradise engineering, right? Um, and so once you have a superintelligence, you have a super engineer. Once you have a super engineer, then all of these engineering problems, like paradise, etc., are easy to solve, right? So AGI is really the key to bringing about utopia. That's why it was Tescrilis who founded the AI companies in the first place, explicitly trying to build AGI, right? No one else in the field of AI who was also outside of the Tescril movement, no one else cared much about AGI. But the Tescrilists were like, no, no, no. AGI is really important for us to create because everything else follows from it. Um, is there something else I want to mention about that? Maybe I'll come back to it. Okay. So yes, so the companies involved in the AGI race race include DeepMind, OpenAI, Anthropic, xAI, which was founded by Elon Musk back in 2023, and Meta. DeepMind goes back to 2010, so it's the oldest AI company, with the explicit goal of creating AGI or superintelligence. OpenAI was founded in 2015, Anthropic in 2021, xAI, like I said, in 2023. And then more recently, Meta has announced that they're starting what they're referring to as a superintelligence lab. And all of these companies are engaged in uh, a desperate dash to the AGI finish line. They all want to get to that finish line first. Um, if you zoom out of the US, though, there are lots of people in this field that justify the race to build AGI by pointing to China. And they say, no, so it's not just an arms race between US-based companies, but on the geopolitical stage, the race is really between the US and China. And so if we don't create AGI first, then China's going to. And they argue that that would be really, really bad. So, for example, there was this paper that got a ton of attention in Silicon Valley, published last year by a guy named Leopold Aschenbrunner. And he writes the following. Before the decade is out, many trillions of dollars of compute clusters will have been built. The only question is whether they will be built in America. Some are rumored to be betting on building them elsewhere, especially in the Middle East. Do we really want the infrastructure for the Manhattan Project of AI to be controlled by some capricious Middle Eastern dictatorship? And down here, um, so because I can't see my cursor, I can't actually minimize the the videos on the side. So therefore, I can't read this. So I'm just going to X out of the full screen thing for a moment. The clusters can be built in the US, and we have to get our act together to make sure it happens in the US. American national security must come first before the allure of free-flowing Middle Eastern cash, arcane regulation, or even, yes, admirable climate commitments. So basically, he's saying that this race is so important to win that even if the consequence is that we exacerbate climate change in the near term, that's worth it, right? Again, tons of people in this community. I know this because I remember having these conversations when I was part of the community. Tons of them will say climate change doesn't matter because, as I'll discuss in a moment, once we build AGI, it's either going to kill us or it's going to solve all our problems. If it kills us, then climate change is irrelevant. If it solves all our problems, then climate change is irrelevant. It'll solve climate change, right? So even if Eric Schmidt, the guy associated with Google, recently said that look, we're not going to meet our climate commitments anyways. So the best thing to do is to plow ahead with AI, pollute more, in hopes that we're going to create we're going to create a super intelligent AI that will then provide us the tools to solve climate change. Again, everything's an engineering problem here. Um, he seems to miss the fact that we know how to solve climate change. We just don't have the political will. It's not really an engineering problem. It's more of a social, political, attitudinal type problem. Okay, so getting back to Aschenbrunner's quote, we face a real a real system competition. Can the requisite industrial mobilization only be done in top-down autocracies? If American business is unshackled, America can build like none other, at least in red states. Being willing to use natural gas or at the very least broad-based deregulatory agenda. Okay, so I'm going to maximize again. Um, I'm very curious about these yellow lines. I've never seen them on the screen before. Okay, so I think that in the quote I just read, he also mentions Middle Eastern countries. So he's really concerned about autocracies getting to the AGI finish line first, um, in front of democracies. I didn't include a quote about China, but his document, which is quite long, is primarily about China. China is the number one competitor to the U.S., not so much Middle Eastern countries, but they still might pose a threat. So I'm worried about the threat that this sort of rhetoric has, um, because it's entirely possible that this could be a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? His document got a ton of attention. It was read by a lot of people around the world. There was a more recent document called AI 2027, and it outlines basically the scenario uh, that we've been talking about, where there's an arms race between the US and China, and it either results in utopia or in catastrophe. And that J.D. Vance explicitly said that he had read that. So I'm very worried that even if it doesn't have to be the case that we can actually build AGI. I'm a little skeptical about that. I'm not sure we can. But it doesn't have to be the case that we can for this to be a danger, right? So long as the relevant parties believe that the country that gets AGI first will rule the world, uh, that's all that's necessary for there to be a reckless arms race between basically Cold War rivals, right? Russia is in this as well. In fact, Vladimir Putin himself said back in, I want to say it was 2019, he was talking about AI. He said the country that, I can't remember the exact words he used, but the country that harnesses AI first will rule the world. And I believe he used the phrase rule the world. Um, so there is growing recognition among great powers that AGI might be really important. And so I'm very worried about this. There's a guy named Jason Buthini who is very much part of the test grill community, and I knew him back in the day. He was the director of IARPA, which is the sister organization to DARPA, which most people have heard of DARPA, but not IARPA. Um, anyways, I was telling him about a journalism job that I had applied for at Vox Media. Ultimately, did not get the job, which was good in the long term. But anyways, I was excited about the job prospects, and I told him one thing I want to write about is the threat of AGI, and he said, "Don't do that because when people talk about AGI and the potential power of this technology, individuals in DC, and he's a DC insider, right? You can't get much more DC insider than the director of IARPA. He said people in DC, their ears perk up, they raise their eyebrows, they get really curious. And so you could inadvertently exacerbate the very situation that you want to mitigate, right? By calling attention, by like basically waving your arms and saying, hey, if we get this technology first, then we get to rule the world. If China does, though, they rule the world. So, um, so I'm really worried about a lot of the rhetoric that you find in Silicon Valley and has now started to seep into the U.S. government. I think another good point of reference here is Karen Howell's recent book, Empire of AI, which is really good. It's it focuses primarily on OpenAI and where OpenAI came from, how it developed, who Sam Altman is. Spoiler: he's not a particularly great guy, like ethically. Very manipulative individual who believes that he is the one to usher in this new age of uh, post-human AGI. Uh, yeah, so that's a good point of reference here. So this is one. I think this. What I'm trying to say here is that I think in terms of peace, um, moving forward, this is an unfolding predicament that is absolutely worth keeping one's eyes on. I think that in the coming years, there will be more and more discussion about an emerging arms race between the US and China. Again, if only because powerful people in those governments have read reports like AI 2027 and situational awareness by Leopold Aschenbrunner. Um, okay, so that's my first point, and then the last point. I think I have 15 minutes left, or
Yes,
yes.
correct.
Okay, okay, great. That's perfect. Okay, so there's another question to ask. So far I've been saying like, okay, there are these reasons. Well, people in the test community would say there are these reasons that the U.S. Really needs to get to AGI first. Second question, well, what happens if we get to AGI? What then? What does that mean for the future of humanity? What does it mean for me and you? Me and you, especially if they develop AGI, like some people, these companies say, in the next few years. That's what many of them are saying. We'll be, for the first time in our history, we will be joined on Earth by systems that are as or more capable than us. That is a completely watershed moment. That's the singularity. It marks a completely new epoch in human history where we are no longer the creatures at the apex of cognitive ability on Earth. Okay, so if you ask the test crew, they'll say there's two primary possibilities once we get AGI. Either it's going to turn around and kill us all as an unintended consequence of having misaligned values, or it's going to bring about utopia. It's one or the other. So there are a lot of like religious motifs that get recycled within these ideologies. So this is very much, they have their own version of Armageddon. That's like, building AGI. That's value misaligned, quote unquote. The alternative is heaven, like a heaven in the literal heavens above us, right? Because we'll go out and colonize space and live in computer simulations. So those are the two likely possibilities, and all of the leading figures. So every one of the leading figures at the top frontier AI companies, again, DeepMind, OpenAI, Anthropic, xAI, etc., all of them have admitted at some point that the technology they're building could kill everyone, right? So OpenAI, so Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, he was asked, this must have been 2023, I think, asked about whether AGI could destroy humanity. He responded, the bad case, and I think this is important to say, is like lights out for all of us. In earlier interviews, this goes back to 2015, he declared that I think AI will most likely sort of lead to the end of the world, but in the meantime, there will be great companies created with serious machine learning. um, he says on another occasion, probably AI will kill us all, but until then, we're going to turn out a lot of great students in machine learning. Um, the OpenAI website itself says that the risks of AGI might be existential, meaning that everyone dies. Let me see, an employee. Oh, so an employee at OpenAI who goes by Rune, who's very active on social media, he tweeted that this was, I think last year, he tweeted that, quote, things are accelerating. Pretty much nothing needs to change course to achieve AGI. Worrying about timelines, that is, worrying about whether AGI will be built later this year or 10 years from now, is idle anxiety outside your control. You should be anxious about stupid mortal things instead. Do your parents hate you? Does your wife love you? In other words, AGI is right around the corner. Its development can't be stopped. And he's basically describing a scenario of like people on a doomed airplane that is barreling towards the ground. In those situations, what do? Well, you turn to, if you're traveling with your loved one, you turn to them and say, hey, I love you. Um, I really care about you. I appreciate you. That's what he's saying humanity should be doing right now because AGI is right around the corner. There was another co-founder of OpenAI, Ilya Sutskever, who says the future is going to be good for the AIs regardless. It would be nice, it'd be good for humans as well. He adds ominously that I think it's pretty likely the entire surface of the Earth will be covered with solar panels and data centers once we create AGI. And this just blows my mind. This is from a article in The Atlantic, quoting Sutskever, again, the co-founder of OpenAI, along with Sam Altman and Elon Musk. He says, once we all get into the bunker, Sutskever began, according to a researcher who was present. I'm sorry, the researcher interrupted. The bunker? We're definitely going to build a bunker before we release AGI, Sutskever replied. Such a powerful technology would surely become an object of intense desire for governments globally. The core scientists working on the technology would need to be protected. Of course, he added, it's going to be optional whether you want to get into the bunker. Okay, so this is the doom prophecy. These people are building a technology they say might arrive in the coming years, and one likely possibility is that everyone on Earth dies. All 8 billion people, me, you, our kids, grandkids, etc. All our friends, everyone we care about. So I find this to be, on the one hand, I'm skeptical, like I said before, that AGI is around the corner. I don't think that's the case. Even though I don't think that's the case, I find it completely unacceptable that leading figures at these AI companies are uttering statements like this. Right? Most of us would not get away with this. If I told my neighbors, like, oh, by the way, I'm doing, I'm doing a little chemistry experiment, might blow up middle of the night, and I know you're living, in your apartment with your family, and I'm really sorry, but like, but if it doesn't blow up, like something really cool is going to happen. The neighbor would call the police, right? They contact the authorities. It's just not acceptable. So I find this to be deeply disturbing. Um, but I think it gets even more disturbing. What if we get utopia? What then? So what if everything goes quote unquote right? The thing about utopia is it's an inherently exclusionary concept, right? Somebody is always left out of utopia. If that's not the case, it's not utopian, right? Marx imagined a world communist state. That was his utopian vision of the future. Who doesn't exist in that utopia? Capitalists, right? Because we've abolished all class distinctions.
Mhm.
Um, if you're if you end up in a Christian heaven and there are non-believers there, then something's gone really wrong. You're not in heaven. Um, so the question then is, whenever someone talks about utopia, you need to ask uh, who is excluded from this, who's included, who's excluded. So I initially worried that, well, I think a lot of humanity is going to be excluded from their vision of utopia because there is just no discussion among test realists in Silicon Valley or elsewhere about what happens to, for example, indigenous communities or like Muslims. Um, I'm an atheist, but I can't just ignore that there are, almost 2 billion Christians, and there will be, according um, to a Pew study, 1.6 3 billion Muslims by 2050. You can't just ignore that. They deserve a seat at the table. Otherwise, you're not designing an inclusive democratic future. You're designing like a deeply elitist, um, exclusionary future, right? So, but beyond that, I think I begin to think, no, 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 it's humanity itself that is going to lose out because the whole point of these ideologies of their utopian worldview is to create a new post-human species to run and rule the world. And what do we think is going to happen when a new post-human species that is quote unquote more capable than us runs the show? Well, we're going to be disempowered, marginalized, and ultimately eliminated because why would posthumans want to keep us around, right? So the thing is that there are people in this community who are way more explicit about this. And as such, they claim that we should go extinct in the very near future to make space, to make room to free up resources for our AI digital post-human successors, right? That's the goal. So there are different shades of pro-extinctionist thought here. One is the like, well, I don't really care if humans stick around, but like we're going to create post-humans and they're going to run everything. To which I would say, in practice, that's pro-extinctionist because post-humans are not going to keep us around. On the other extreme, you have people who explicitly say the goal is to get rid of humans. So here are a few quotes. So people don't need to take my word for it. Jaron Lanier, a world-renowned computer scientist who is based in Palo Alto, he was interviewed by Vox, and he said the following: "What drives me crazy about this is is that this is my world. I talk to the people in AI, who he's referring to, who believe that stuff all the time about human extinction, and increasingly, a lot of them believe that it would be good to wipe out humans, to wipe out people, and that the AI future would be a better one." He goes on to say that just the other day, I was at lunch in Palo Alto. There were some young AI scientists there who were saying that they would never have a quote bio baby because as soon as you have a bio baby, you get the mind virus of the biological world. And when you have the mind virus, you become committed to your human baby. But it's much more important to be committed to the AI of the future. And so to have human babies is fundamentally unethical. Um, Here are a few other quotes. Here's one from Richard Sutton, who is a Turing Award winner. That's basically the Nobel Prize of computer science. He says succession to AI is inevitable. And while AI could displace us from existence, we should not resist succession, but embrace and prepare for it. After all, why would we want greater beings kept subservient? Why don't we rejoice in their greatness as a symbol and extension of our own greatness? Larry Page, who is the co-founder of Google, and Google now owns DeepMind, one of the companies trying to create AGI. He says digital life is the natural and desirable next step in cosmic evolution. And if we let digital minds be free rather than try to stop or enslave them, the outcome is almost certain to be good. This guy, Eliezer Yudkowsky, who I mentioned earlier, is the founder of rationalism. He says if sacrificing all of humanity were the only way and a reliable way to get godlike things out there, intelligences who still care about each other, who are still aware of the world and having fun, I would ultimately make that trade-off. Um, and I'll read one last one from this guy, Daniel Fagella. He says the great and ultimately only moral aim of artificial general intelligence should be the creation of a worthy successor, an entity with more capability, intelligence, ability to survive, and moral value than all of humanity. And he goes on to say that this is the type of thing that we should want to take over the world. We would gladly hand over the keys to the government to this system, and then it's mixing metaphors. It drives the car from here on out. Um, so he recently held this symposium called Worthy Successor, AI and the Future After Mankind. This was held in San Francisco in a mansion there, and it was attended by a lot of people, including at least two people from every major AI lab. Some of the leading philosophical thinkers of AGI, including the guy um, who promoted the term AGI in the first place back in 2007. So these ideas, this like really extreme version of pro-extinctionism, this is catching on. Um, I wonder, can you hear the sound? Could you hear the sound just now or not?
No,
No.
You can't. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so this is another guy who's being interviewed by New York Times, and who's saying, look, the ultimate goal is so he used to work for OpenAI, and he's saying in this interview, the ultimate goal of AI is to create utopia. The catch, though, is that the cosmic utopia that our descendants are going to build, those descendants aren't going to be us, right? They're going to be something different. So we're handing off the baton to these AIs. They're the ones who are going to go out and colonize the universe, create, you know, huge amounts of quote unquote value and so on. So it's the exact same kind of pro-extinctionist view that I've been talking about. Um, so I'm going to skip some of this because I just all I do on these slides is go into some detail about how Elon Musk essentially holds this view. He likes to say, I'm a humanist, as opposed to those dangerous extinctionists. His view is pro-extinctionist. He is actively trying to bring about a post-human world in which those post-human beings run the show, which they control everything. They're far, quote unquote, more superior, far superior to us. Um, and so the, I guess the point here is just to emphasize that there are, like I said before, different shades of pro-extinctionism. But pro-extinctionism in one form or another is all over the place in Silicon Valley. Why? Because pro-extinctionism is at the heart of the TESCREAL ideologies, right? Because the whole point of the TESCREAL worldview is to create post-humanity, right? And why would anyone think that humans are going to stick around if we create post-humans? So TESCREALism itself is deeply and intimately intertwined with a pro-extinctionist vision of what the future ought to be. Those textual ideologies have gone on to massively influence some of the most important figures in Silicon Valley today. And consequently, they are pushing, this is my argument at least, they're pushing for a ultimately a pro-extinctionist vision of the future, which I um, strongly reject. So I think even their quote unquote good outcome would be pretty catastrophic for humanity. Um, that's my talk. I hope it was. I hope I moved things along fast enough so it wasn't boring.
It's
Thank you for
certainly
listening.
a point, Emile, and it's also something that we need to hear. And I've got several questions. And would anybody like to ask the first question before I get into them? But while others are thinking about their questions, one I certainly have, in the process, even researching and working on, we're building these enormous buildings with huge energy demands. Will we eliminate ourselves in the environment just in the process of the research?
I love this question.
Sad.
I have wondered in public about. So there are many reasons one might think that we're not going to build AGI, or that we're not going to build AGI in the near future. So maybe there are like technical difficulties. Maybe it's just really hard to build a system that is complex enough to replicate the functions of the human brain. Because this thing in between my ears is the most complex object in the known universe, right? There are hundreds of billions of neurons, trillions of synaptic connections, and so on. So maybe there are technical reasons we can't build AGI, but maybe there are practical reasons. Maybe it's the case that on the road to AGI, we have to build stepping stone models that have such a catastrophic impact on the world that civilization crumbles before we have a chance to build AGI. So it's kind of a bleak a bleak thought. But you're totally right that there's a very large carbon footprint. I'm trying to remember statistics. I think this is going to be very close to accurate, but probably not exactly. I think Microsoft's carbon footprint has increased by 27% since 2020 or 2019, all because of AI, right? So they have claimed we'll be carbon neutral by 2030. The trend is going in the opposite direction. Google, I think in the same period of time, I think their total carbon footprint has increased by 40 something, like 47%. So there's all this fresh water that is used by the data centers. You can't use salt water because that's going to corrode the pipes. You need fresh water to cool down the data centers because data centers are just using up so much energy that they're producing enormous amounts of heat, waste energy. And so you got to cool them down somehow. Fresh water is the way. So they'll build these data centers by cities or neighborhoods where people are literally like turning on their faucet and no water's coming out, right? Or their water bill is going through the roof because the AI companies have some deal with the local utilities, the government, et cetera, such that the AI companies don't have to pay. So it's the people who end up paying for all the extra water that's being used by the data centers. Beyond that, there's absolutely the possibility that generative AI, these AI systems that we like ChatGPT, that they are and will continue to enable people to generate and propagate uh, disinformation about climate change, for example, right? And there's, if there are conspiracy theories and alternative facts, about climate change that are circulating on social media, being generated at a very rapid pace um, in a very compelling manner, because one of the things AI does well is mimic human
Emily,
language.
can I interrupt?
Yes,
See, I am a physicist. I am not an engineer.
yeah.
We teach engineers concepts. And you are only talking about what engineers are saying. Do engineers understand quantum gravity? I mean, they talk about
Uh,
universe. You can't even get to the border of this galaxy in a billion years.
Yeah,
A lot of
yeah,
assumptions there.
yeah,
Second, tell AGI and do look new physics. You can't do that because you have to do experiments.
yeah,
And to do experiments in quantum gravity, you need galaxy-size observatories.
yeah,
Can you do that? It's a lot of assumptions there, and you need to start talking about tech people. They are not the one who teaches people about science concepts.
yeah,
So much noise. They are owning the media and confusing everybody. And talking about the extinction of the human race is psychopathic. We
yeah,
need to first investigate that, right?
yeah,
Thank you,
yes.
Doctor. Emile, would you like to
A lot of
respond?
assumptions.
Yeah, so I completely agree. I think that uh, a lot of people in Silicon Valley who have been successful in their careers as engineers, computer scientists, and so on, they've made a lot of money. They've gotten a certain social status, and that I see this all the time. That leads people to think, well, because I have expertise on one topic, I think I'm probably an expert in authority on like every topic, right? Because I'm really smart, so I feel comfortable then. Philosophers would call this epistemic trespassing, a fun little term. So I feel comfortable like talking, pontificating about topics that I've never actually studied, right? So you do get a lot of these people who make very bold claims about like AGI is going to invent new fields of physics, right? And there are there are domains of physics that we've not yet discovered, but AGI is going to be super intelligent, so it's just going to invent new physics. If it wants to study quantum gravity and try to finally solve the puzzle of how to integrate general relativity with quantum field theory, then it's going to go out and colonize space, and it's going to use technologies we cannot right now possibly fathom to build like a galaxy size, whatever the experiment would be, whatever the apparatus would be. And this is part of the power and the facileness, I think, of utopian thinking, because there are all of these problems that when you have the utopian mindset, you can just arm wave away. Like you ask some of them like, well, how is that going to work? How's that actually going to happen? And they say, well, it's going to be super intelligent. It's going to be God, so it'll find a way. We don't need to be able to determine how it's going to do what it does. It will, we're like an ant looking up at New York City and going like, how did this happen? So the super intelligence will be that far above us. Does that make sense? I hope I kind of addressed your point a little bit.
So let me give a particular example. If I want to simulate the beginning of the universe, you know how much computing power requires? These people who talk design, this chat GPTs, the LLMs, it can come up with equations, but ultimately to solve that, you need supercomputers,
Yeah,
more like the classical computing, not the pattern matching things. So
yeah,
when it comes to that, whole thing will slow down.
yeah.
So AI will help us in advancing, but AI cannot surpass us because we will serve. I think we will evolve together along with the AI technology.
We are going to call it to an end. We've gone over time. This has been fantastic.
Oh, sorry about that.
Created thank you so much. What you have done is begin to create us to think beyond of where we were before we got here and what's going on out there. And it causes us to think what is real and what can happen.
Yeah.
Um, Emile, we're indeed grateful for the work and what you did to better the world and the information you bring to us. Well, all thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and experience. I do want to share just a little bit about next month, just very shortly. Next month, we'll be honored to have Steve Kilalia, who is the founder of the Institute for Economics and Peace, commonly referred to as IEP. He'll share with us the latest statistics on the Global Peace Index, where we're getting better, where we're getting and or not. And spoiler word, it also may not be the best news. Again, Emile, we are blessed. We're thankful very much for the enlightening, if not maybe frightening, But
Enlightening and frightening. I like that.
definitely critical that we become aware.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks for asking those 2 questions. Those were really great. Yeah, very nice to meet everyone, and it was a pleasure.
Emile, sending you off with the peace salute.